So this is just to build on what Greg really had to say. So some of these are very surgical concepts, but for the most part, these are transferable to whatever short-term medical missions you want to do and how you partner with people who are long-term on the ground. First thing you need to know is that you can't save the world. Jesus already did that. He died. Don't try to do something he did. You're not as good as him. Philippians 1:21, to me, to live is Christ and to die is gain. If you're going to go short-term, adopt that. Some of the things we're going to talk about today is maybe what not to do. So being the surgeon that I am, what's going to kill you is what we need to rule out first. So these are the things that are going to kill you or kill the people you're working with on a short-term trip. So things you don't pack when you're going. Don't pack your ego. Leave it at home. Really, nobody wants to see it. Probably not even in your house. Don't bring your Savior complex. That's specifically for you surgeons in the room. We are not God. Even if maybe other people treat us like that sometimes, especially on short-term trips, you are not. Don't take God's place. Don't be the American stereotype. That's that you know everything, you can fix everything, and you're happy to tell everyone that you know everything and you can fix everything. And they're happy to let you try, even when they know you're going to fail. Paternalism, as Greg said, leave that one at home. But don't go the other side of pity either. Nobody needs your pity. That's not human dignity. That's pity. We don't need pity. Don't be rigid, and don't leave the two-tone printer at home. That's black and white. Everything's black and white. I know the right way or I know the wrong way. There's nothing in between. Because most of the places, if you're going on a short-term mission trip, there's a whole lot of gray. And by the way, in the real world, there is gray. We just like to be very polarized in this country. And so leave that two-tone printer idea at home. What you think it looks like, that is black or that it's white or whatever, you're probably wrong, and you've misinterpreted. You're getting the clue here that come on pretty strong at the beginning. I've spoken with some of you. Greg's here up front. He knows that I'm not usually that way on individual interactions, but I also know from what Greg has said that a lot of people come and make a mistake and do big things wrong in short-term missions, specifically medically. Brief little story, and then we'll go on to some other things, and that is I was driving one of our short-termers up from the hospital to take him back to his place and for the night, and he said, "Oh, Keir, we're glad to be here. We just don't want to be a burden." And I looked at him and I said, "Well, it's too late." "But I'm glad you're here." He looked at me very perplexed. I said, "Well, somebody had to coordinate you getting here. Somebody had to get you at the airport. Somebody had to drive you down here to the hospital. Someone has to translate for you because, you don't speak French. Someone has to coordinate your housing while you're here. You're a burden. But we're glad you're here." And that's okay to be a burden. That's okay. That's one of our American problems, is we think we can't ever ask anybody for anything, especially us guys. No, I don't ask directions, and I don't have to anymore. I have GPS now. But days gone by, who doesn't stop and ask directions? We don't, because we can figure it out. We can do it on our own. That's individualism. You can leave that at home. And in case you're going to be confused, you're going to see this more than once on this little talk today. It's not about you. We got it? Everybody together? Let's say it together. It's not about you. Wow, that was really good. You guys you're tracking with me. It's not. And we often think it is. And somehow in God's economy and the way he works at the end, it may be about you. But it may be about what God did in you, not what he did through you. Because remember, he already saved the world. You don't need to do that. So here's the packing list. We're going to talk about team makeup, spiritual life, cultural preparation, raising support, on-site interpersonal interactions, and medical work. We're going to go fast. Because I think I have I have 30 minutes. And 25 minutes is what I have left. In case you forgot, because I know we forget really quickly, it's still not about you. You're going to see that again. And I would say this is really a good verse to think about when you go on any short-term trip, both for your team, as you define a team that's going to go, but also as you go to partner with people who are on the ground. It's a spiritual concept, but it's good even within the medical world. For just as each of us has one body with many members, and these members do not all have the same function, so in Christ we, though many, form one body, and each member belongs to all the others. Each member. That means you belong to them and they belong to you. Just let that sink in for a minute. You belong to them and they belong to you. Each member belongs to all the others. It's true in your family, that's true in your team, and that's true when you go someplace to serve. Each one belongs to all the others. It's a two-way street. All right, so on the team makeup, just briefly. At some point, you're going to send out some invitations if you're the one leading. Who's led a team? Anybody led a short-term team here? Right. And it was really easy just to put the team together. I mean, in 5 seconds, God just said, here's the people who need to go. Probably not. It takes time to figure out who is it that really God wants to be on this trip to go to this place, wherever this place is. So think about how you're going to do your invitations, how you're going to select people. Are they going to self-select? People do that, and sometimes that's what God tells you. Just really wait. They're not going to be on the team. They just don't know that yet. Sometimes it's self-select. We'll talk a bit about funding and how are you going to do that? I've heard of short-term teams where, I'll just say it, the rich surgeon says, I'm going to pay for 3 people to go. I wouldn't encourage that unless God really tells you to do it. I mean, he does say crazy things to people at times, like to Hosea to take back his unfaithful wife. I don't understand it, but I would challenge you that unless you're certain that's what God has asked you to do, that's part of the skin in the game. That's part of everybody trusting what God has for them to go on this trip and for them to recognize it's not about them. We'll talk a little bit more about funding as well. Sometimes when we think about team, this is what we think about. Anybody been on a long-term mission, served more than 2 years? Yeah, a few people. Did your team occasionally look like that? People yelling at each other? Never. It's okay, you can repent later. It's complicated. The stressors are big. Everybody has an agenda. Sometimes it's your own agenda. Sometimes we really see God's agenda working out through each of us. It's hard. And if you're in the surgical world, there can be a lot more yelling and screaming. When you go to join people that are working long term, this is what they're living. They're living conflict. The stress level of somebody serving overseas is twice the stress of someone generally living in the United States for an American. Twice. It's like moving, getting a new job, and having a kid all at the same time. And that's just regular daily life. The stress is high. It's very easy to let that cause problems. And remember when you go to this place that God has called them there, they're serving there long term, and that you're going to go for a short time, then you're leaving. But they're not leaving. They're staying behind. Keep that in mind. And that they is either your long-term missionaries or the nationals you're serving with. They're all staying behind. Keep that in mind. Remember these things when you're putting your team together, when you're doing the work, and when you're serving together. There are certain things that maybe they're absolutes. Other things are just convictions, like what you really think is important, but it's not really an absolute. Sometimes it's preferences. What flavor ice cream you eat, that's probably a preference, although some people might think it's an absolute, those ice cream lovers. In case you forgot, still not about you. Let's move on to a bit of spiritual life things. So there's nothing special that happens to you on a 757, so this is years ago, crossing the ocean. Harry Gebert, a medical missionary. Whether you're going long-term or short-term, the person you are here is who you're taking with you. You're not going to suddenly become this ultra-spiritual person. You're not going to suddenly do things differently. And if you do, I would wonder about you. Why aren't you doing them here? Nothing special happens to you on that 757. But I will tell you, getting out of your comfort zone, going to serve, short or long term, we often hear better from God when we're in a place that's not comfortable, when we're out of our routine. Embrace that. Take the time to hear from him. Other spiritual life things. Be open. Don't make judgments either way. What I mean by that is don't look at the missionaries who are long-term and say, I can't believe that they act this way. Don't look at the nationals that you're serving with and say, I can't believe that they act this way. Oh man, how do they support these missionaries? How do they handle them? Or how do they handle the nationals that they're working? Don't do it. You don't know what's going on. You don't understand the context of the interaction. If you do have questions, ask them, but reserve your judgments. And do expect to have some time to spend with God on these short-term trips. It's unusual that you would be working 24/7, and if you are, I would challenge you that you're doing it for you, not for the people that you're serving with or among or who you're trying to serve to. That busyness is so that you can say, oh, we saw 200 people a day when we got back to the United States. We can say that. Makes us feel really good, and everybody goes, wow! And your ego gets bigger, but it really didn't serve any purpose. So keep these things in mind. Jesus says, I'm the vine, you are the branches. He who abides in me and I in him bears much fruit. Apart from me, you can do what? Nothing. In case you forgot, it's still not about you. So cultural preparation. This is an area that I really find interesting. I think we won't spend a lot of time, but remember that you're looking into two cultures, the missionary culture and whatever culture you're serving with. And they're different. And often the hospital that you're going to go with, you notice I said hospital that you're going to go with, as Greg said, a long-term establishment. You're not going to set up a little clinic somewhere for 3 days and then leave. That's probably not the way that you should be doing it. There are times to do that, but you need to have long-term partners on the ground. They're going to look different. The nationals you serve with and the missionary culture and the hospital culture is neither one. When I was at Bangladesh, I would say frequently, we are not American culture, even though people call it the American hospital in Gabon. We're not Gabonese culture because, well, we're not all Gabonese here. In fact, we're not all American Gabonese. We're a bunch of different nationalities. What we actually are is a bungalow culture, but that's really not what we want to be either. What we want to be is what the biblical culture is. I haven't seen it yet on the face of this earth. I haven't seen it in this country nor any other country that I visited. That's not okay, but it's okay to recognize that your culture is not perfect, nor is the one that you're serving with. No culture is perfect. That's really okay to recognize that. Some things about education and understanding, and we'll go real quickly because my time is short, but recognize that the people that you're going to serve among, the nationals that you're serving with, and the things that you may be trying to teach, and that's okay. You maybe have some things to teach them. That's okay. They have some things to teach you. That's the problem if you don't recognize that. You do have some things to teach. Why else would you go? So if you're going to teach, recognize that your teaching style and their learning style might not be the same. If you're sitting in a room like this, if I'm sitting with 6 or 8 of my residents, when I was in Gabon and I asked a question just openly to everyone, crickets. Absolute silence. That's not how you learned in those Francophone cultures. That's not how they were used to. There's a lot of other things we could talk about, but we'll move on quickly. So remember, what they expect of you as a teacher and what you expect of them as a learner probably don't jive. But if you know yourself, that's a good place to start. How is it that we expect people to learn? How do we expect teachers to act? And you know the culture you're going to, which is a lot harder to learn, you can get something done. You can actually make some progress. That's not necessarily meaning that you're accomplishing tasks. But you can build relationships. You can lay a foundation for future growth for you and for the people you're serving. Appreciate the differences, but don't glorify them either. There are times that people will say, oh, I had a friend come back from a trip to Burkina Faso, and he said, oh, it was great. I just loved being there. It was amazing. The Burkina Bay people and they are wonderful people. But I'll come back to, there is no culture that is perfect. He was very much glorifying things that he liked and appreciated about the Burkina Bay culture that he didn't like in his own culture, and so it became an amazing culture. I'm sure there are aspects, but it's not perfect either. Look at your expectations. All right, culture shock. If you go short term, it might happen. It might not. It probably will, but you won't know about it. You won't recognize it. If you go long term, it always happens, and you never recognize it. You might say, oh, I think I'm in it, but only because somebody told you at 6 months to a year you're going to go through it, not because you actually know that you're in it. Everyone in it seems to deny it. No, it's not culture shock. These people are crazy. Okay, let's talk again in 3 months. And usually 3 months later, it's a different story. Reverse culture shock happens. It's really hard for me. When I came back to the U.S., went to the school that my kids were going to go to, I stood in the hallway. All the light bulbs worked. It was clean. The paint looked nice. The floor was nice. And I honestly had a point of feeling, I got to get out of here. I can't be here. It was not comfortable for me. It's still not comfortable, but that's okay. Home isn't on this earth anyway. Also remember to become all things to all people, that by all possible means you might save some. That's really losing your identity, because it's not about you anyway. It's just not about you. All right, raising support. For those of you who are medical and say, oh, I make a good salary, I make a good wage, I don't really need to raise support. Yes, you do. I would tell you you do. It creates a team, and it gives you accountability. You have to answer to somebody when you get back. It's just how the world works. It does work on money, especially our culture. And so you have to answer to someone. You have to tell them about your trip. And if it's a spiritual accountability, because people are giving, they don't really care that you treated 500 people. They're going to have different kinds of questions, and those are the kinds of questions you need to be answering anyway. So do it. In case you forgot. So this is from a friend of mine, Bruce Steffes. I think probably a number of people here know Bruce. I think this is a good quote that captures the idea of what you're going to face, the people that you're going to work with, and how they feel. We are perfectionists in environments which make that laughable, professionals without our tools, performing by necessity in areas beyond our training and out of our comfort zone, and we are always acutely aware that our decisions carry life and death consequences. That's heavy. You still want to go? That's heavy. If you really embrace it, it's heavy. So the reality is that you're going to go to a place where you're going to have either missionaries there or nationals that have been thrust into positions that they were not prepared to take. Those of us who know a little bit, maybe you all know, I would imagine, a bit about medical mission history and some of the transition from a medical mission hospital that is all expatriate run to a nationally run hospital, it's been done very poorly in the past. In fact, I think the word transition might be a gracious word to use. There wasn't transition. It was pretty much missionaries are here running it. See ya. Good luck. And they disappear. But even the missionaries didn't know what they were doing either, because they're physicians trying to build buildings. Last I checked, I didn't want the engineer taking out my appendix. As a surgeon, I probably shouldn't build a building. And if you want to know what buildings look like that are built by surgeons, I can show you a few. They're not very functional. So we're underprepared and unprepared to do the things. So recognize that when you go short term, you're asking, well, why doesn't the administration do? Why don't the other doctors do? Wow. Yeah, that's a great questions to ask. It's not because they don't want to. They just may not have the training. If you're going long term, what I've also heard is, well, I didn't come here to do this. Okay, then tell me why you came here. Well, I didn't come here to do bookkeeping. I didn't come here to submit receipts. I didn't come here. Okay, so let's go back. Why did you come? Was it about you and all the things you were going to accomplish as the surgeon and doctor that you are? Or did you come because God said go, and maybe this is exactly what he wanted you to face? Finances are always difficult, whether it's mission related or medical related, whether it's the hospital or it's not. Greg gave that example. What do you do with a hospital that says you have to provide free care? You provide free care and then you have to start charging someday because you want to exist for more than 5 minutes. And so you start charging, but everyone else is giving free care and then they go home, and how do you survive? So there's a lot of things that have been done poorly, and there are a lot of things that have been done well. I think we also need to say that. A lot of things have been done well. And I can tell you some stories about that, where a very distinguished African theologian was in a medical mission, mission meeting, and he was hearing a lot of complaints about how older missionaries had done things. He's an older gentleman. He's the kind of guy that he walks in the room and everybody just goes, and he just has a presence about him. Godly man. He stands up and says, all these things that you're criticizing are true, but you have to remember one thing. They brought us Jesus. And he sat down. Really, what else has to be said after that? Yeah, they weren't perfect. His acknowledgement was, and what he was trying to tell them is, you're not perfect either. In 20 years from now, everybody's going to be criticizing what you did too. So be careful. So you can run a sprint or you can run a marathon, but you cannot sprint a marathon. So you're running a sprint when you go short term, and you can run a sprint. But the people that you're going to work with are running marathons in very difficult places. Reserve your judgment. All right, it feels busy, but yet at the same time, the work never turns off. In case you forgot, it's not about you, still not about you. So medical work, we'll get into this, a little bit of surgery things in these last few minutes here. So this quote here, if you don't like something, change it. If you can't change it, change the way you think about it. That's about as American as it gets, right? It's not fatalism, because fatalism doesn't think that you can change it. And a lot of the places that you're going to go serve have a very fatalistic mindset. I would say just take out that middle part. If you don't like something, change the way you think about it. Forget about trying to change it, especially short term. You can't. You just can't. Some of the challenges, it won't be what you're used to, primitive conditions, limited supplies of medications, old and or malfunctioning equipment, uncertain power supply, poor anesthesia or no anesthesia, maybe unsanitary, but you need more experience to deal with these things, not less. Yet we often say, oh, you're young and ambitious, you go. Whew. Yeah, more experience to deal with these things, not less experience. Some things that you can do now, whether you're specifically on the surgical side, be thinking about how to do more with less and train your brain to think about, what if I didn't have this laparoscopic tool? How would I do this as an open procedure? Okay, so maybe I will have laparoscopy. How will I do it when the Maryland doesn't work? There's no needle driver. The laparoscopic ports are leaking and the power goes out. Then what am I going to do? Force yourself to think through these things ahead of time. Visualize them. When you do that really easy appendectomy here, think about how does that look in an environment where, oh, I don't have a CT scanner or another doctor or the good thing, usually it's really not good, but it seems good as the perspective of the surgeon. People present late, so usually the diagnosis is pretty easy at that point. Right? It's those early ones that we have to get all these tests. Well, we don't have all those tests, but most people come late, so it's really often defined for you by the time they get to the hospital. But you can start thinking about, how am I going to solve these problems? This is what I would recommend, specifically on the surgical side. Focus on the principles, not the standards. Know the standards, but if you're focused on the standards, you'll get nothing done. Because you will say, well, they don't have this, and we don't do that. Well, okay, I guess we can't do that case. And the patient says, okay, if you can't do it, I'll go back to the village, to the witch doctor. At least in Gabon, that's what they said. I'm not sure that's better. Maybe you didn't have all the standards, but often these things, all the stuff we do in the U.S. is for that last 5% of complications to avoid them. 50 years ago, people did pretty good work without all the tools that we have today. You can still do good work if you focus on your principles. Don't focus on the outcome versus the process. There's two aspects to that. Think about both. Think about competence. What is a competent thing to do here? Not the right thing. Remember, we're black and white. There's right and wrong. If I do it this way, it's right. If you don't do it that way, it's wrong. Remember, there's one way to do a procedure in surgery. It's the way I do it. Okay, there's not one way to do it. But there's my way and there's other ways. How do you accept certain substandard care today? So you will go as a short-termer and say, man, I can't believe they're doing this. And the long-termer says, yeah, we're doing that today because that's what we have. It's not what we hope to be doing 5 years from now. So how do you come alongside them and encourage them what the next step is, not just, as Greg said, to identify all the things they're not doing. They probably know that list. They don't need help with that list. What they need help is figuring out what on that list is the low-hanging fruit with the biggest bang for the buck. I'm going to talk about a few cases. Lumbar hernias, probably haven't seen one. Here's a fracture that I saw that the guy, well, we could judge this because this is, for those orthopedic surgeons, there's a lot of things wrong with the way they did this, but I will tell you that's probably all they had. They did the best they could with what they had. Really? That's all we can do. What do you do with an open ankle fracture or fractured dislocation, open dislocation when you're not an orthopedic surgeon? Well, the standards are, so I can't do the standards, so I'm going to send them home. No, we look about principles. What can I do to fix this or stabilize this? No, I'm not an orthopedic surgeon, but I can do something. That, you may not even recognize that organ. Some of you, that's a uterus. Greg, for the orthopedic surgeon here, that's a uterus. I think he knows about this one, but maybe not that one. So focus on your principles, not your standards. Keep your expectations low. Don't have zero expectations, but keep them reasonable. And often we say, well, just do what they want, and there's some truth to that. But remember, if you just did what people wanted, I don't think God ever asked me just to default and do what everybody else wants to do. I don't think he says that. So that may not be the right answer. Things to bring suture. That's usually what runs out. Things related to your specialty. So if you're any surgeons, who's the surgeon here in the room? We don't have too many, a few. So are you a specialist? Urology. So that's perfect. Things related to your specialty. Certain catheters you want that you're going to use, they may not have. Both pre-op, intra-op, and post-op materials. If you're someone who's going to go and do hypospadias repair, bring those small little instruments to do that hypospadias repair, because I can guarantee you they won't have them. But if that's what you're going to do, bring the things related to your specialty.